Hey everyone, it's Dan, the founder of DataInterview.com, ex-Google and PayPal data scientist. In this video, I'd like to cover a topic based on a product data science interview question. And the type of question is the following: how would you improve a product? This is the type of question that's commonly asked in product data science interviews. This is about putting yourself in the shoes of a data scientist in the company that's interviewing you, and then thinking about how would you use data and extract insights that can be meaningful in the form of, hey, you know what? I have an idea for a new feature or an enhancement of a current feature that can help the product grow. So let's do a deep dive in terms of how do you approach this type of problem. So I just want to first of all mention that this is a type of problem because it's about how would you improve a product. And so you would have multiple companies asking similar questions like this. For instance, Google might ask a question about, how would you improve Google Maps? And this is a fairly fair game sort of question, especially if you're interviewing for the product analyst role at Google. And then Uber could also ask a question about, how would you improve the user experience on Uber Eats? The difference is the keyword, but the essence of what is the main aim of this this type of question is pretty much the same. It's about improving the product essentially. And then the Meta company, or formerly known as Facebook, might ask a question about should Facebook create stories. And so you can see that this is also, you can see that they might also ask you a question about, hey, you know what, we have an idea for a new feature, should we actually build this or not, right? But regardless of whether they actually mention a specific product that they or feature that they want to build out, the essence of how you would approach this type of problem is pretty much the same. So I want to mention a framework, a 5-step framework that is useful in terms of approaching this type of problem. And so the first thing is to define the goal of the problem. So this is really where you bring out, what is the business objective and what is the product experience of this, of this type of problem, right? And then the step 2 is walk through the user journey. So this is really where you do like a high, in-depth details in terms of what is the typical user journey. What are the types of users that use this platform, and what's the user journey from the beginning to the end, right? As soon as they land on the website or the platform, what kind of tasks can they achieve, and what sort of satisfaction experiences do they get out of this, right? And also talk about the monetization aspect of it as well. And all of these are basically a stepping stone for you to think about what are ideas that you can definitely propose to the interviewer. But also at the same time, you're demonstrating to the interviewer that you have product knowledge about the company that you're interviewing for. And that is really important. And then the third thing is to brainstorm 2 to 3 ideas that can be really helpful, right? So based on the user experience of the current platform or the future, can you think of ways to enhance it, right? The last thing you want to do is mention something that's already there. And that can be somewhat costly because the interviewer might think you haven't really done the research in terms of the latest sort of user experience of the product. So the third step is to brainstorm 2 to 3 ideas. And then the fourth step is to validate ideas using data. So the last thing that you want to do is just basically say, hey, you know what, I have an idea for building out a new feature, but you're not really able to back it up with data. And so this is where you kind of put yourself in the shoes of a data scientist. And imagine if you have all kinds of data, right? And obviously you can clarify with the interviewer and ask the person, hey, can I use any sort of data source, or are there particular data sources I'm sort of restricted to, right? And then think about, what kind of user events can you look into that suggest that users want this, right? And this is about finding proxy behaviors that seem to convey a certain intent. And I'll talk a little bit more about how this works as I go through an actual illustration in terms of how do you approach this type of problem. And then the last part is, now that you have 2 to 3 ideas and you're able to validate that, hey, people are actually wanting to use this, you have to now prioritize the ideas based on the one that the product team should focus on, right? And this is really about putting yourself in the shoes of a product manager and then kind of thinking about, how would you actually among these three ideas, which one do you think has the highest sort of ROI, with kind of minimum effort, right? And so this is about you being able to prioritize, what to focus on. And that's a pretty typical behavior among, responsibility among data scientists, especially when you have all these competing ideas. What do you focus on, right? And that's what the interviewer wants to see. So we're going to go ahead and actually talk through this type of problem by going through this exercise. How would you improve Google Maps? And, why don't you actually just pause the video for just a couple seconds and just kind of think about how you might respond to this question, right? Imagine if you're a candidate for the product analyst role at Google, or if you're interviewing for any sort of product data science interview in general, and you have a product science interview coming up. Take a moment, right? It could be a couple seconds, or it could be a minute or 5 minutes, and just use the Google Maps, open up the Google Maps, and just kind of go through the user experience and think about, hey, you know what? I wish there were these features that can be really helpful. That would make my life so much easier, right? And then think about how you respond to this as though you were an actual candidate. So pause the video and then, resume. All right, so let's do a deep dive. Let's apply the framework that I mentioned in this type of problem, right? So the first thing is to really define the goal of the problem. And so you want to definitely want to walk through, kind of demonstrate, some knowledge about, hey, you know what? I understand what this problem is asking, right? I've often seen, as I've, coached candidates for interviews, I might ask questions about, how do you measure success for, platform, or how do you, validate whether whether a product should be built or not, right? And the candidate often have these clarifying questions, and it's really important to have clarifying questions, but at the same time, it's important to be somewhat intelligent in terms of what questions you're asking, right? Like, you don't want to ask questions about, you don't want to ask a clarifying questions, what do you mean by success? Or how do you want me to measure success? When that is a very question that the interviewer is asking. And I've often seen this type of clarifying question as in like, how would you, like, what do you mean by improving Google Maps, right? You don't want to ask that when that's basically what the interviewer is asking, right? Rather, the way to sort of frame this is, first of all, start with some assumptions and then clarify to see whether you're on the right track. So you can kind of lay out a couple things, right? So if I was a candidate, responding to this, my opening response would be something on the lines of, thank you for this question. I think this is very interesting and very important because improving Google Maps is about really focusing on 3 different areas, or combination, or maybe one of these areas. And I know that improving Google Maps can be in the form of, improving the user experience. So maybe helping them achieve a certain task, much quicker. It could be about helping to promote businesses, and obviously businesses can promote themselves in Google Maps by letting users know that, hey, this business exists on a map, but in a form like a pin and like a specific location. And then the last thing is, maybe it might be in the form of helping Google Maps generate, advertisement revenue, right? Because that's one of the main advertisement stream for Google Maps. And anytime you go on the app itself, and sometimes if you click a specific business, you might see like an advertisement banner in the search result. And so whenever a user clicks it, that's, basically businesses that are taking out these advertisements are paying Google for every click. And so this, it could be in that form as well. Or maybe there might be this sort of one idea that might help all of these 3 aspects, right? So it's important to kind of, first of all, establish, what does it mean to improve a product here, and start that as like your clarifying assumptions, right? Like, make these assumptions and ask the interviewer, are there particular areas you want me to focus on, or do you just want me to kind of do like a general sort of exploration and then converge into one idea that I would probably recommend to a product manager, right? That's how you demonstrate expertise. You don't start by asking some sort of general questions and expect the interviewer to provide hints for you. So once you have established this step, the next step is to essentially walk through the user experience, right? And this is something that, even if it's the type of app that you've often used, maybe it's like Uber or Instacart, or whatever it is, it's often easy to just kind of passively go through like what the core features are. I've used Google Maps often, and even for me, when I'm doing this sort of research, in preparation for the interview, I have to pretend as though like I'm an actual like UX designer or basically like place myself in the mind of like a product manager and really deconstruct the app, right? So one thing I recommend is that if you have a product data science interview coming up, right, whether it's for Uber, whether it's for Google or whatever it is, right? Actively use the app, right? And create a Word doc and create an outline of, hey, here's what are the core functionalities of these features, and here's what the user experiences are from the beginning to the end, right? And that is going to be incredibly helpful. That map in your mind is going to be incredibly helpful whenever you need to address questions like this. So how I would respond, further build on my response would be like, okay, first of all, I just want to walk through the user experience here because I think this is important as a stepping stone for me to think about what potential ideas there are, right? What ideas could perhaps enhance Google Maps. Now, I know that at its core, there are two types of user bases. So there's the regular users like myself, the commuters, who loves to navigate through things, right? Like I need to go from point A to point B. I need to browse places, right? Like maybe I'm trying to look for new eateries, like music venues to go to. Maybe I just want to do like a specific search, right? There's like a search bar. I can search like places to eat or something like that, right? So those are one of the core functionalities. And of course, there are a lot more, right? But generally just follow the rule of three. Like you don't want to like overwhelm the interviewer with so many things, and the next thing you know, you're not really ever able to cover the main things, right? So just start by focusing the core functionalities, and then kind of provide some details from there, right? The other aspect of the user group could be like businesses, right? So businesses can definitely establish their location in Google Maps, so they let other people know that, hey, this steakhouse exists in San Francisco. Maybe you should definitely check it out. And they can also take an advertisement as well, right? As a way to promote, maybe like a particular service or something like that, right? And I've often see it like every time I look up like restaurant in the search banner, I often see like advertisements from like Postmates or Uber Eats because they obviously have some partnerships, with these restaurants in terms of delivering food to consumers, right? And so they would take out these advertisements. So these are the user experience. These are one of the core sort of user experience in Google Maps. And once you have demonstrated this, you show to the interviewer that, hey, the product knowledge, but also at the same time, this is also going to help you come up with really cool ideas. Then the third step is really the sort of like an entrepreneurial side of things, right? This is where you have to like come up with ideas that would be really helpful for improving Google Maps. And so right off the bat, so I can think of 3 ideas, right? And it can really start from your own personal experience, but also it can start by saying, hey, I would actually do some investigation on data and then kind of extract what potential behaviors users are expressing. And then from there, come up with some ideas that can help remove these friction points that they're suffering through, right? So there's all these different angles in which how you would approach this. But in terms of like what you do afterwards, it's exactly the same. And I will show you what I mean by this in a second. But basically, the 3 ideas I have are this. So, and I really wish Google Maps would actually build this. So if anyone from the Google Maps team is watching this, please add these features. So the first thing is ETA planning. So what I mean by this is like, how like when you're searching to, like when you're trying to navigate to a place, like it shows the ETA in real time, the current moment of what the ETA is. But what if you're doing like a plan for like a trip elsewhere, right? And you want to see what typical ETA is given various time of the day, right? So like I live in San Francisco and sometimes I like to go to Santa Cruz. And like I noticed that there's a lot of variability. Like sometimes there's traffic, like heavy traffic on like Thursday afternoon. And I'm like, what the heck is going on? Like who goes to Santa Cruz on Thursday afternoon and stuff like that? And it kind of makes you wonder, like, it'd be nice if you can kind of like look at trends, right? Historical trends of like what the ETA is. Like pick out a day and a time, and then the location, and then be able to see, what has been the general sort of ETA for this time at any point in time, right? And that could be really helpful for people trying to make trips, like any sort of commute, especially if you move to like a new city and you want to do a little bit of exploration outside of the city or through the city. Like that sort of lookup will be incredibly helpful. And I do see that like there's some aspect of this on Google search itself. Whenever you search like a business, like a restaurant or something like that, they do have like these bar chart that shows like how busy a restaurant typically gets. So I certainly wouldn't see why like Google Maps cannot have something like that for ETA as well. And then the second thing is street parking information. So how often do you drive to like an urban area, like a city or a new city, right? And you're struggling to find a parking spot, right? And you don't really want to pay for like a parking garage because they can be somewhat expensive, especially in a city like San Francisco, where you're paying like $20 an hour or something like that, And so a person like me would typically look for street parking, but then like when you look it up on Google Maps, like there's no information about like what are areas where I can do street park, what areas I can't. And if I knew that information in advance, I would probably go to that street, right? Otherwise I have to drive around. And when you drive around San Francisco, my God, it's a pain in the butt. There's all these one-ways and hills, and there's all these signs, like sometimes it's they kind of conflict each other. Like the one sign is saying, don't park from 4 to 6, and then another sign is saying, you're allowed to park, and it's on the same street. And so it's like really confusing. And so it'd be incredibly useful if Google Maps can help find that information, right? And then the third thing is, local. This can be really helpful for local, venues, right? So I love going to happy hours. I love going to these special events that music, like theaters and restaurants and bars host and stuff like that. And it'd be nice if the advertisement display that shows up in businesses are actually from these local businesses promoting some events, right? And this can be really helpful in terms of like users looking for these type of events, but also venues as well to attract new customers, to bring back current customers, and also it can be helpful for Google because it can help them generate advertising revenue. So you start by like laying out a couple ideas, right? And then eventually you say, okay, what I would probably do is do some like validation to see whether people will be using this, right? And so the next step is basically, validating the idea using data, right? So in terms of the ETA planning, like how can you validate this idea? So you can look at search histories, right? Search routes where like users have searched for a particular location, but they did not physically move, right? And this could be indicative that, hey, you know what, they're doing some plannings here, right? They want to just kind of get a general understanding of how long it takes to actually commute somewhere, right? So if there's enough volume of this type of search, maybe it's indicative that, hey, you know what, we could definitely build out this type of feature that can be really helpful for users, right? And then in terms of street parking information, this could be like in the form of people who search, who are basically they search for parking spots, right? And they park cars on the street instead of like a parking garage. And this could be, this once again, like look at the volume of this type of search, right? And that could be indicative of whether there's potential demand for this type of feature. And then the last thing is, users who search events like happy hours and shows, right? So Google has a way to like track, from people who are using like Google Maps to just a regular Google search as well, right? So see, like, are there type of users who are searching for a particular location or like a business, and then they happen to search like, happy hour at this restaurant called a bar called Bergerac or something like that, and basically find that history. And if there's enough volume of that, maybe there's it's suggestive that, hey, this could be really helpful for for the type of users that I just mentioned earlier. So the last thing is to prioritize which idea to build. And one way to approach this is basically using this prioritization framework. It's called impact versus effort analysis. And this is often used in product managers and consultants as well. And you can bring this out as a way to think about how you would actually evaluate which idea to focus on. And that's really powerful way to show to the interviewer that how to basically define the scope of the problem and then be able to figure out like what to focus on, right? And so this impact versus effort analysis, basically for each idea you're evaluating whether this has low, medium, or high impact, and whether it has a low, medium, and high effort. And ideally, you want to go pursue an idea that's going to return high impact with low effort, as opposed to a high impact and high effort. And of course, there are some exceptions to that, but generally, that's what's desired, right? Because you want something that's going to give you the highest sort of ROI, minimum effort and maximum return. And so you can kind of approach each of the idea based on this, and you can say, based on this analysis, I can say that ETA planning would be low impact and low effort, and you can and basically you would obviously have to kind of justify in terms of why that is, right? So if I were to sort of approach this, like I would say, like so in terms of just sort of looking at the impact here, like this is how I'll rank it. So I think the ETA planning is low, street parking information is medium, and event planning is high. Event banner is high. And the reason why I ranked it this way is because I think that even though there are types of users who may want to do some ETA planning, I just don't believe that there would be high enough of volume. And obviously we can kind of validate it through data. And at the same time, this is not like a must-have feature, right? It's like nice to have, but it wouldn't be like the main sort of functionality that people would often use. And so that's why I think the impact is low. I think the street parking information is definitely, relatively speaking, compared to ETA planning, it's higher than low. It'd be medium, because people commute a lot, and this type of information can be really helpful and remove a lot of friction points for a lot of commuters out there, especially if they're looking for parking spots. But I don't believe it would be as high as the event banners, right? So because this not only helps users find locations or events that they want to go to, but also helps businesses, and especially during the pandemic time, as a lot of these venues are reopening, they're trying to attract customers, regain old customers through these sort of happy hours and events, and so they're perhaps a really good medium, a way for them to send out any sort of events that they're hosting, right? And so these event banners can be incredibly helpful, but at the same time, it could be additional source of revenue stream for Google Ads. So we're serving all three aspects of this, and given that, that's why I think the impact would be really high. But in terms of the level of effort that is required, I believe that ETA planning is low because it doesn't really require much sort of major revamp on the engineering besides looking at historical trend and aggregating it, and then basically storing it somewhere and displaying it on on Google Maps. So there wouldn't be much kind of sort of cross-functional coordination that is required to build out this functionality. Now, in terms of street parking information, I could definitely see it being high because you have to be able to extract information at a street by street level, and sometimes that can change. And I could think of obviously this might require coordination with some software engineers and machine learning engineers as a way to parse this information in the form of some urban database, like a municipal database, or like computer vision, right? Because Google Maps or Google Earth has all these different images of, like street by street, and they could perhaps extract, what is the latest sort of street information from these signposts that are on, that are on the street, that lets them know whether a car can be parked or not, right? But that kind of effort would be hard in terms of the engineering effort that is required to build something like this. And similar thing, I would say the level of effort that's required to build out these event banner would obviously require coordination among the advertisement team, basically, attracting like new customer, like advertisers for this type of banner. That might take some time. It takes time to basically do a bit of like a redesign on on where this type of advertising gets displayed and stuff like that. So I believe that the effort itself would be fairly high. And in terms of which one I think we should pursue is that I think the idea should be event banner, because as I mentioned earlier, this not only, even though the effort in is high compared to like other features per se, in terms of the impact that we're getting from this would be really really powerful for users who are browsing for venues to go to, businesses and advertisement revenue. And so I think pursuing this idea would be important. And you just ended it with that. And of course you mentioned additional sort of caveat saying, of course, like obviously this requires conversation with product managers and engineering managers, and then just kind of converge toward which idea to focus on. And it'll be through the meetings and kind of documentations, and you would obviously flesh it out. But in terms of just like the information I currently have, I think this is the best idea to pursue. And so you mentioned that as a caveat, but also at the same time, you're showing that you have real life experience in being able to, basically approach this type of problem. And that's really what the purpose of these interviews are. So that can be really helpful. So there you have it, guys. So those are the 5 steps in terms of how would you approach a problem about improving a product. Now, if you like this type of content, make sure you check out DataInterview.com, because it contains courses, contains A/B testing, product cases, question banks, and like mock interview videos that are going to be really helpful for your interview prep. But also at the same time, there's also coaching services, so you can pair up with an instructor like myself, and then I can give you like a personalized mock interview for the Meta data scientist interview, Google data scientist interview, pretty much any data scientist interview. And so make sure you check out datainterview.com, and I will see you in the next video.